Chapter 2. Moving to the other side. It was good to have a job, but bad to be without a home. I started work in 4 weeks, and a condition of my employment was that I had to live within 1 square mile of the Salt Shaker Centre at 174 Antrim Road. The Reverend Taylor summed up the reason behind this principle perfectly. We want to be a part of the local community, not a bunch of do-gooders from suburbia. I agreed, although I was a do-gooder from up the Shankill, which was steadfastly non-suburban. I respected the Reverend Taylor because he practised what he preached, which was rare in Belfast. He lived with his wife and 3 small children in the old manse in the grounds of Duncairn Presbyterian Church. This church residence made the young family the most obvious of the few Protestants remaining on the lower Antrim Road, which was now a Republican area. The other few elderly Protestants in the nearby streets who had chosen not to move out tried to avoid unwanted attention by keeping their heads down. The manse had steel security grills on the downstairs windows due to multiple burglaries. Sometimes the Reverend Taylor typed his sermons on the floor of his office when there was shooting outside. Upstairs, the cots in the children's bedrooms were situated well away from the windows to protect them from bullets or broken glass. Stone throwing to break the Protestant windows of the manse was an acceptable youth sport. The RUC rarely caught the attackers, but of course they had other priorities in the area at the time, such as recruiting informers and trying not to get shot. Other Protestant clergymen who had found themselves in similar circumstances had insisted on moving to safer areas away from the social problems of their parishes. I respected the Taylors' courage in staying put. Finding an affordable and available home for myself proved much more difficult than I had expected. My first port of call was the Northern Ireland Housing Executive on the Shankill Road. I queued for several hours in a dirty office that made the Snugful Street Dole office seem palatial. I was certain that my meagre salary of £5,000 per year would entitle me to a council house. When I finally got to speak to a housing officer and inquired if I could live as close to the peace line as possible, the housing officer's bright red plastic spectacles slipped down her well-made-up nose in surprise, and she raised her pencilled eyebrows ever higher. When I added that I wanted to live on the Catholic side, her expression changed from surprise to that mix of concern that crosses a professional's face when it dawns on them that the person they are dealing with may be unhinged. I noticed her eyeing the panic button. She dispatched me with the news that as a single and employed person, I wouldn't earn enough points to place me sufficiently high on the waiting list to get a house in any area of Belfast. My next tactic was to scour the classified advertisements in the Belfast Telegraph. The to rent section was always smaller than deaths and occasionally even had fewer columns than Pet's Corner. But I still studied the listings. Most of the rentals were in the once fine Victorian terraces around the Antrim Road that had been crudely converted into flats when their middle-class inhabitants had scarpered as a result of the Troubles. Every single flat I viewed was cold and dirty, with peeling woodchip wallpaper and evidence of mice. The worst smelt of boke and piss, and there was a distinct whiff of marijuana seeping under the neighbours' flimsy doors. Even if these properties had been habitable, I was shocked to realise that I couldn't afford the rent. It seemed that most of these rents were paid for through housing benefit. They were more affordable on no pay than low pay. Then I spotted a room to let in a big old Victorian detached house off the Cavehill Road for an attractively low rent. When I arrived for the viewing, the son of the elderly lady who was living out her days alone in this family home greeted me. It was a lovely old-fashioned house with wooden panels in the hallway and doilies on the arms of the sofas. The house felt warm and homely, and the elderly woman seemed very nice, although a tad wary of me. Her devoted son explained to me that the reason for the low rent was that I would be expected to keep a wee eye on his mother. After the viewing, he explained the proposed arrangement to me in detail as he walked towards his BMW. As long as I was there in the evenings and every night, I would be a suitable tenant because there was a home help who visited his mother during the day. I wanted to tell him to look after his own mother, but I was still too polite to speak my mind, and instead I phoned him later to explain it wasn't really what I was looking for. However, by this stage, I was getting so desperate, I had seriously considered accepting the role of night nurse just to secure a place to live. 2 weeks before I started the job, on the sort of sunny, bright September morning that scundered Belfast school children back at school after the long wet summer break, I went to meet my new boss, who had outperformed me at my first interview for the director post, and to see the office where I would be based. The Salt Shaker Cafe was full of pensioners having cups of tea and scones, and several burly workmen tackling mammoth Ulster fries. The freshly painted walls, newly varnished second-hand chairs and sturdy pub tables made the Salt Shaker look like a proper cafe. The only difference was the notice board for youth and community clubs and the carefully chosen gospel tracts that weren't about the unsaved going to hell or anything else offensive. The volunteers in the kitchen waved to me, but they were too busy to chat as there was an altercation at the till with Tonto, a tall ginger teenager who was protesting that he had not put his hand in the till and swiped a fiver when the volunteers' backs were turned to make him a cheese and ham toastie. "I'm telling the fucking truth," he protested. "Yous are supposed to be Christians and you don't even believe me." Tonto's flushed face belied his protestations of innocence. "I'm John Evans," said the newly appointed director in a soft Welsh accent that seemed out of place at the top of the New Lodge Road. It dawned on me that Lesley and my new boss shared a surname, and that I would be taking daily instructions from Evanses for the foreseeable future. John Evans was a small man in his early 40s with a UDR moustache and a warm smile, and he seemed very down to earth for a Baptist pastor. He also had a twinkle in his eye that suggested he wasn't all holiness. As soon as we met, I understood why he had been chosen over me to lead the organisation. It was obvious that his experience and maturity outweighed mine. "Shall we see upstairs?" he said, ushering me out the front door of the cafe to the adjacent large green door that led to the office and flats above. As Tonto ran past us with a box of Tato cheese and onion crisps under his arm, he shouted, "See, the Brits are even watching the Christians!" He was referring to the soldier who I could just about make out through the slits in the concrete and steel in the small fortified army post that was on the other side of the cafe. It was a raised narrow concrete box in a massive steel cage, and the scorch marks from blast bombs and the accompanying graffiti made it clear that the Brits were not welcome here. As we entered 174 Antrim Road, I noticed fresh boot marks on the big green door. "Don't worry, it's a very sturdy door," said John. We climbed the steep stairs to the office, and when I looked back, I noticed the heavy security bolts on the inside of the door and the steel grills on the window at the top of the stairs. "This will be your office," said John, showing me into a room with old-fashioned wood-chip wallpaper and 2 big windows overlooking the pub and the bookies across the main Antrim Road. "We use this room for staff meetings and prayer meetings," explained John, pointing to the recently donated second-hand sofa and faded armchairs gathered around the fireplace. "But there'll be enough room at the end for a desk, so it can be your office too." I nodded, imagining my pens and files and a stapler on my very first work desk. The floor vibrated as a bus passed by on the Antrim Road. This had previously been a flat. We were in the former living room. The main office was in the master bedroom, also overlooking the bookies on the Antrim Road, and the director's office was in the smaller bedroom at the back with security grills on the windows. As John showed me around, I found that the flat also contained a large kitchen with no appliances apart from a dirty sink with greasy taps, a broken oven and a lime-scaled kettle. The carpets in the hall were ancient and dirty, but John and I agreed that the smell wasn't too bad, and part of the sacrifice of full-time Christian service was making do with limited resources and a certain amount of hardship. At the back of the flat, beside the security door at the fire escape, there was a separate toilet and a bathroom with a small wash-hand basin and a yellowing bath. "The immersion heater still works, so we always have hot water for the office," explained John, as positively as possible. It was at this moment that I had a brilliant idea. Or maybe God spoke to me, or maybe both. The only thing missing was a bedroom. But if I could find a cheap sofa bed, it could double up as somewhere for me to sleep at night, and seating for the prayer meeting by day. I put the idea to John. He looked a little surprised. He never said the words, but I noticed that his brow furrowed and his eyes twinkled in a manner that suggested he thought I might be mad for wanting to live in a dump like this, beside an IRA-targeted British watchtower. John had been excused from living in the area because he had children. I thought this was unfair because I was given no option, and after all, the Reverend Taylor had young children and he lived there. John said he had to check with the chairman, but to my great relief, the Reverend Taylor accepted my suggestions and even agreed a low rent for the bedsit to be deducted from my monthly salary. I thought this was a generous arrangement, but when I told my father, he called the Reverend Taylor a tight Scottish chancer for asking me to pay any rent at all. "If they can get you to believe all them fairy stories in the Bible, no wonder they can get you to agree to anything," he said. I did not listen to my father. I listened to my conscience, to God, and to the Reverend Taylor. I was overwhelmed with relief to have found somewhere that I could live until my wedding day in December the following year. The next 2 weeks were hectic. I had to purchase all of the basic equipment to make my semi-bedsit semi-habitable. My most important investment was a sofa bed. Unfortunately, my paltry resources did not stretch to the luxury of an actual sofa with a foldable bed frame. However, I managed to source a bargain in Texas Home Care in the slightly soiled section for £25. This sofa bed was basically 3 large pieces of foam covered in beige polyester that folded together to make a 2-seater sofa. With minimal effort, this lightweight material unfolded into a perfect single bed. I claimed an old fridge that had been donated to the 174 Trust, and I bought a 2-ring tabletop cooker for £30 in the bomb damage sale in the Co-op Superstore. A copy of Cooking for One by Delia Smith, a gift from my former P5 school teacher, Ruth, completed my kitchen. £10 worth of cleaning products upgraded the bathroom suite to almost white. I claimed some reverence from my parents' new hall and stairs carpet and a few old rugs from their roof space to cover all of the bare floorboards. For less than £100, I had created a bachelor pad. Finally, I packed my clothes into both my parents' suitcases and all my favourite books and cassettes into several large boxes I'd found at crazy prices. I loaded everything into my father's Fiat Panda and transported my whole life 2 miles to the other side. I parked the car on the pavement to unload. I wondered if the soldiers inside the watchtower were discussing whether I was moving ammunition right under their noses, hidden beneath ABBA's Greatest Hits Volume 2, The Lord of the Rings, and a large red edition of the New International Version of the Bible. "You moving in?" asked Soup, en route to the bookies across the road. "Aye," I replied proudly. "Fucking mental. Wait till you see what them bastards do to us round here," he shouted as a heavily armoured RUC Land Rover drove past. I knew Lesley was calling soon and I wanted the bedsit to look impressive. I popped across the road to the wee shop and bought tea and coffee, a carton of milk, a Vienna roll, a tub of Flora and 2 apple turnovers. Brrr. I ran down the steep flight of stairs to welcome Lesley, but found instead Seamus and Anthony looking high and smelling of glue. I didn't know the brothers very well, but they had a reputation for being hard men, and I had been warned that Seamus was known to headbutt anyone who irritated him, including youth leaders. Seamus pushed his face right into mine, so close that I inhaled some solvent, but he said nothing. "Hi lads, what about ye?" I said calmly. "I've just moved in." Seamus stared at me without blinking, still right in my face, while a girl pushing a pram distracted Anthony. "You wee her," Anthony called after the young woman, whose pace quickened notably. "Are yous'ns coming to the youth club tomorrow night, lads?" I asked. Seamus looked into my eyes intently, but said nothing. I was hoping Lesley would arrive soon to save me. While I often felt in real fear of being walloped, Lesley could wrap lads like Seamus and Anthony round her finger with a lovely smile and a hint of double entendre. "Mon you," said Anthony sadly, and the brothers departed without either an assault or a farewell. As they disappeared into the distance, Lesley arrived in the Renault 5. "The traffic," said Lesley. "You have no idea." As Lesley stepped out of the hatchback, she instantly became the best-dressed person within a 3-mile radius. Her obsession with fashion made her stand out from the crowd anywhere, but especially here. I was afraid this would draw attention to us, and I just wanted to blend in. The more people who noticed I was here, the higher the possibility they would work out I was a Protestant living on the wrong side. Lesley knew she looked different, but was not the kind of person who would change her clothes just because someone might think she didn't belong. I think she was braver than me. She was carrying a spider plant and a bottle of Domestos as my housewarming gifts. "This place will need a woman's touch," she proclaimed. "Touch away," I flirted. As we made our way into the flat, Patsy's mother was passing. "Hello," I said. "Hello, love," she replied. "Our Patsy loves your wee club, so she does." "Tell Patsy it starts again tomorrow night," I answered cheerfully. "I'm just moving in." Patsy's mother stopped for a second and turned around. "Could you not find anywhere to live on your own side?" she asked. There was an embarrassing pause, and then I replied, "I don't believe in sides." Patsy's mother laughed, more at me than with me, and walked on, as I ushered Lesley up to the flat. Lesley walked around my new accommodation. "It's, lovely," she said eventually. "Do you want a cup of tea and an apple turnover?" Lesley did not reply, but immediately set to applying most of the contents of the bottle of Domestos to every conceivable corner in the kitchen. Once she was satisfied, we settled down for a cup of tea in front of Cagney and Lacey on my ageing black and white television. At last I felt I had my own home. Of course, it wasn't perfect. My expectations had fallen as my search for accommodation had become more desperate. Although I'd only be living here for a short period, I felt proud of myself for choosing some hardship and sacrifice in my life, like a missionary living in a hut in Africa. When Lesley departed with a goodnight kiss, she commended my efforts on making the bedsit habitable and for making the best of a pig's ear. But I knew that there was no way Lesley could have lived here. She had grown up in a big house in the country with outhouses and an orchard, and this tiny flat was smaller than the stable for her ponies. I didn't sleep well on my first night. I had to get used to the normal creaks and bangs of the building, which I mistook for rats and robbers. The 6 a.m. bus to Glengormley created a shudder that vibrated across the floorboards and rattled the windows like a minor quake. I got up early to start work, folded my bed and looked across the room. I was already at work. My daily commute would consist of 3 steps from my bed to my desk. When the small staff team arrived, we gathered on the sofas in my room for the prayer meeting. John Evans arrived a little late as he was sorting out an incident of alleged theft by one of our painters and decorators on the ACE scheme. The complainant did not regard our young worker as ACE in any way. As a result of his late arrival, John had to sit on the new sofa bed, which, although comfortable as a bed, was not a very supportive sofa. And he lost some of his dignity, leading us in a prayer for the lost souls of North Belfast, while sinking into the sofa foam so rapidly that his knees were at a higher level than his head. After the Amen, I was introduced to my new colleagues, some of whom I knew from volunteering on past summer schemes. Stuart, who ran the cafe and the junior youth clubs, with Eleanor, a church volunteer from England, Jean, who visited the local senior citizens and ran the pensioners' club, and Joan, who was the secretary and fount of knowledge in all that was going on inside and outside of the office. Next, I had to pop around the corner, past the army watchtower and the church, for a meeting with the Reverend Taylor in the manse. As I walked around the corner, I bumped into Jerry, looking bleary-eyed. "I've to sign on in Corporation Street," he sniffed. "I hate them old dolls down there. They treat us like shite." "Are you coming to the youth club tonight in the salt shaker?" Jerry drew deeply on a cigarette. "Aye, maybe. I hear you're living round here now." "I moved in yesterday." "Is big Lesley not moving in with you?" "No, Jerry. Sure, you know, Christians wait till they're married, so we do." "I couldn't wait till I got to your woman's house last night. I lumbered her up the entry." "Charming," I replied. "Anyway, you'sen's living in them flats is the only prods round here, apart from that ginger vicar and a few coffin dodgers around the corner. You need to watch yourself round here." "What's wrong with Protestants, Jerry?" "No offence, mate. There are some good ones, but you can't really trust them." At this moment I was stunned to hear a North Belfast Catholic parrot the exact opposite of what I had heard a million times as a West Belfast Protestant. Somehow I had assumed that sectarianism was a peculiarly Protestant phenomenon, because I had heard it articulated so many times by my own side. But I had never heard casual sectarianism expressed in such familiar words from the other side. This was different from people shouting at you in the street and calling you an orange bastard. Most people in Belfast only voiced their sectarian feelings in front of their own sort. The IRA always insisted it was just unionists who were bigots and that Republicans were entirely clean from political and religious hatred, a concept that must have been baffling for their victims as they shot them in the head. Jerry interrupted my reflections. "Yous Christians are all right, like," he said. "Thanks, Jerry," I smiled. "Being a Christian is more important than being Catholic or a But before I could finish, Jerry interrupted. "But I'd still feed the whole bloody lot of yous to the fucking lions."